My name is Ethan Clark, and for the better part of my 30s, I believed that loyalty, hard work, and integrity could protect you in the corporate world. I thought if you kept your head down, did your job better than anyone else, and avoided the office politics, you could rise the right way. I was wrong. I learned, in the most brutal fashion, that sometimes your downfall has nothing to do with your performance, and everything to do with someone else's greed and favoritism. For 8 years, I worked at Westbridge Consulting, a mid-sized firm that handled contracts for some of the biggest retail companies in the state. I started as an intern, fresh out of college, and I clawed my way up through grit and long nights. While my friends were bar hopping or sleeping in on Saturdays, I was in the office, fine-tuning proposals, building spreadsheets, and preparing presentations. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't the guy who bragged about his accomplishments in meetings. I just got the work done, and I got it done right. That quiet reliability became my identity in the company. If there was a client about to walk away, they'd hand the project to me. If there was a late-night deadline no one else wanted, it ended up on my desk. I didn't complain. I thought of myself as the safety net, the person who would never let the company fall. And deep down, I thought that kind of loyalty would be rewarded one day. The man I reported to, Richard Grant, was the polar opposite of me. He had charm, bravado, and a smile that could light up a boardroom. But beneath that smile was something cold and calculating. Richard wasn't about results, he was about image. If he could make himself look good by standing on someone else's work, he did it without hesitation. I saw it happen countless times. My proposals? He'd present them as his. My analysis? He'd summarize it to clients as though it were his insight. Even my late nights meant nothing, because by the time the morning meeting rolled around, Richard was the one in the spotlight, reaping the praise. I told myself it didn't matter. Someday, the right people would notice. Someday, the truth would come out. But then came Eric, Richard's nephew. Eric was 22, barely out of college, and the definition of entitled. He strolled into the office in designer sneakers, wore headphones during meetings, and treated deadlines like suggestions. He had no grasp of the work, no respect for anyone else's time, and no fear of failure, because he knew he wouldn't face consequences. His uncle protected him. At first, I thought it was temporary. A summer internship, maybe. Some family favor. But when I saw Richard grooming him, giving him opportunities he hadn't earned, a knot of dread formed in my stomach. Still, I didn't think it would touch me. Not after all I'd done for this company. I was wrong. It was a Thursday morning when Richard called me into his office. His door was made of frosted glass, but I could still see Eric lounging at his desk outside, feet up, scrolling on his phone as though the entire company was his playground. I stepped inside, expecting maybe another assignment, another late-night rescue mission. Instead, Richard folded his hands across his desk and gave me a smile so rehearsed it made my skin crawl. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "you've been with us a long time. You've done good work. But sometimes companies need fresh perspectives, new blood, younger energy. You understand, don't you?" I frowned, unsure where he was going. Of course. Innovation is important. But he cut me off. "That's why we've decided to make some changes. Effective immediately, we'll be transitioning your role. Eric will be taking over your projects." My heart slammed in my chest. "Excuse me. You've done enough heavy lifting," Richard said, as if he were doing me a favor. "It's time for the next generation to step up. You'll have a couple of weeks to wrap up your work, but after that, your services won't be required." The room spun. My throat tightened. I had given this company 8 years, blood, sweat, and nights I'd never get back. And now, tossed aside like a broken tool, I was being replaced, not by someone better, not by someone more qualified, but by a kid who couldn't tell a profit margin from a grocery receipt. I forced my voice to stay steady. "Richard, this doesn't make sense. My performance has been spotless. Clients trust me. I just brought in a major account last quarter. If this is about budget..." He waved a hand. Don't make this harder than it is, Ethan. Sometimes it's not about numbers. It's about vision. Eric has potential. I clenched my fists under the desk. Potential. That was the word. Eric had nothing but the right last name, and that was enough. Richard leaned back, satisfied, and delivered the final blow. I suggest you be professional about this. Leave quietly. No fuss. Who knows? Maybe there'll be opportunities elsewhere for someone with your diligence. I walked out of that office numb. The hallway felt longer than usual, the fluorescent lights harsher. Eric smirked at me as I passed, as if he knew exactly what had just happened, and relished it. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the walls. The betrayal burned deeper than I expected. It wasn't just about the paycheck. It was about identity. I had built my life around the idea that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and delivered results, you couldn't lose. But here I was, unemployed, discarded, humiliated. I thought of calling Richard, begging him to reconsider, but my pride stopped me. I thought of sending out resumes immediately, but my anger froze my fingers on the keyboard. Instead, I poured myself a drink, stared out the window at the city lights, and made a quiet promise. If Richard thought he had won, he was wrong. I didn't know how yet, and I didn't know when. But I would make sure the truth came out. I would make sure the people who mattered saw me for who I was, and Richard for what he was. And when that day came, I wouldn't just take back what I lost. I'd take everything he thought was his. The first month after Richard fired me was the hardest month of my life. Not because I couldn't find work, though that was tough, but because of the silence. I had spent 8 years of my life inside those gray walls, surrounded by the rhythm of meetings, client calls, and the dull hum of fluorescent lights. Suddenly, it was gone. My days stretched out empty, my phone sat quiet, and the world felt like it had moved on without me. When people asked what happened, I swallowed the shame and lied. I said I was between opportunities, that I was looking for something new. I couldn't bring myself to say the truth, that I had been replaced by a 22-year-old with no qualifications, simply because his uncle wanted it that way. But in that silence, something else grew. Not desperation, not yet. Something sharper. Focus. I stopped asking why me, and started asking what next. It began with a call. One of my old clients, a retail chain I had worked countless late nights to keep happy, reached out. They were furious with Richard's team. Deadlines missed. Numbers botched. Promises broken. Ethan, the client said, we don't know what happened after you left, but everything's gone downhill. That was the first spark. I listened, sympathized, and made a note. One complaint didn't mean much. But then came another call. And another. Soon, a pattern emerged. The company's foundation was cracking without me holding it together. Richard had thrown me out, thinking I was disposable. But he hadn't realized the clients trusted me, not him. He hadn't realized that behind every shiny presentation, I was the one who had done the real work. And now, with Eric fumbling his way through projects, Richard's mask was slipping. I didn't strike back immediately. I didn't rant on social media or send out angry emails. No, patience was my weapon now. I began gathering. Quietly. Methodically. First, I collected every email thread I still had access to, archived files that showed the truth, proposals written by me, client presentations built by me, crisis reports solved by me. Each one was time-stamped, undeniable proof of who had done the work. Next, I started reaching out, carefully. Not to Richard. Not to Eric. But to people who mattered. Mid-level managers. Senior analysts. Even the assistants who kept the office running. I didn't complain. I just listened. And what I heard was gold. Frustration, resentment, exhaustion. Richard's leadership was a joke, and Eric was worse. Morale was collapsing. Then came the unexpected call. It was from Mark Davis, one of the executives just below the CEO. Mark wasn't someone I had ever worked with directly, but he had seen my name on reports. He asked me to meet him for coffee. When I arrived, Mark got straight to the point. "Ethan, I don't know the details of why you left, but I'll tell you this. Since you've been gone, things have gone to hell. The CEO has noticed. And so have I." I sat very still. "I appreciate you saying that. It wasn't my choice to leave." He nodded knowingly. "I figured as much. Listen, Richard may have thought he was protecting his nephew, but he's put this company at risk. Numbers don't lie. And the board is starting to ask questions." A jolt of adrenaline ran through me. This was bigger than I expected. "Keep your phone on," Mark said before leaving. "There may be opportunities sooner than you think." For the first time since that awful Thursday morning, I felt hope. Not just hope, purpose. The next weeks became a chess game. Richard strutted around at conferences, bragging about his innovations. Eric posted photos on Instagram of his big meetings, most of which were nothing more than catered lunches. But behind the scenes, I was building something stronger: credibility, trust, and evidence. The turning point came at the quarterly review. A friend from accounting slipped me the numbers. Richard's division was bleeding money. Clients were leaving. Deadlines were being missed. But the reports he submitted to the board were glossy lies, filled with cherry-picked data. I sent an anonymous package to Mark Davis, one filled with the raw files, the unedited truth. Every missed deadline, every dissatisfied client, every email chain showing Richard and Eric covering their tracks. A week later, I got the call. "Ethan," Mark said, his voice low and deliberate, "the CEO wants to meet you." When I walked into the corner office, I braced myself. The CEO of Westbridge, Alexander Pierce, was a man with a reputation: sharp, ruthless, and allergic to incompetence. He didn't waste time with small talk. "I've heard about you," he said. "And I've heard about Richard. Tell me, in your words, what's been happening." I chose my words carefully. I didn't beg for my job back. I didn't whine about being mistreated. I simply laid out the facts: the work I had done, the state of the division after my departure, the chaos caused by nepotism. Then I slid across the folder I had prepared: clean, organized, undeniable. Pierce flipped through it silently. Then he closed the folder and looked me in the eye. "You're not the first person Richards tried to bury," he said. "But you may be the last." He didn't smile, but in that moment, I knew. The tide had turned. By the time I left that office, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was silent, deliberate, inevitable. And Richard? He was too busy congratulating himself to see the storm that was about to sweep him away. The day of Richard's reckoning didn't arrive with thunder or lightning. It came dressed in polished shoes and crisp suits, in the form of the quarterly board meeting, the same meeting Richard had been bragging about for weeks. I wasn't supposed to be there. At least, not in Richard's mind. In his world, I was long gone, forgotten, another casualty of office politics. But when I walked into that glass-paneled conference room, folder in hand, I caught the flicker of surprise on his face. He masked it quickly, but I saw it, the crack in his perfect facade. The boardroom was tense, humming with the low chatter of directors shuffling papers and sipping coffee. At the head of the table sat Alexander Pierce, the CEO. He glanced at me, gave the faintest nod, and then turned to Richard. "Richard," Pierce said, his voice calm but commanding, "why don't you walk us through your division's performance this quarter?" Richard straightened his tie, smoothed his papers, and began his performance. That's what it was, a performance. Slides full of polished graphs, glowing words about strategic growth, cherry-picked statistics designed to impress. His voice carried confidence, his smile radiated charm. He even threw in a few jokes, earning polite laughter from some board members. But I wasn't watching the board. I was watching Pierce. The CEO sat with his hands folded, his face unreadable, eyes flicking occasionally toward me. When Richard finished, he leaned back with a smug grin, as if the applause was already in the air. "As you can see," he said, Our division is thriving under my leadership. We've brought in new energy, fresh perspectives. The future is bright. Silence hung for a beat too long. Then Pierce spoke. Thank you, Richard. Now, he turned his gaze toward me. I'd like Ethan Clark to share his perspective. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. Richard's head snapped toward me, his jaw tight. Ethan? He doesn't work here anymore. Pierce raised a hand, silencing him. He has information the board needs to see. Ethan. I stood, my heart steady. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment every sleepless night and every patient step had led to. I didn't need slides. I didn't need flashy graphs. I had the truth. I laid out the reports, the raw data, the emails, the client feedback. I showed the missed deadlines, the lost contracts, the false numbers Richard had polished into his presentation. I highlighted the stark contrast between the division's performance when I had been there and the chaos after my departure. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't attack Richard directly. I let the numbers, the facts, the undeniable evidence, do the speaking. When I finished, I looked around the room. The board members weren't laughing now. They were whispering, frowning, shifting uncomfortably. Finally, Pierce leaned forward. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. Richard, would you care to explain why your presentation doesn't match the data Ethan has provided? Richard's face flushed. He stammered, shuffled his papers, tried to spin a story about transitional challenges and miscommunication. But the board wasn't buying it. And then came the final blow. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair, turned to Richard. Is it true, he asked, that your nephew was placed in Ethan's role? Richard hesitated. Eric is learning, yes. He has potential. The man shook his head. Potential doesn't pay the bills. Performance does. Murmurs of agreement spread around the table. Richard's mask crumbled. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He glanced at me, eyes full of a fury he couldn't unleash here. But it was too late. Pierce closed the folder in front of him. Richard Grant, he said, his voice like iron. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position. Security will escort you out. The room went still. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted around, searching for someone, anyone, to defend him. No one did. Not even Eric, who sat pale and trembling at the back of the room. Sir, this is a mistake, Richard began. Pierce's glare silenced him. The mistake, he said coldly, was thinking nepotism could replace competence. Two guards appeared at the door. Richard's face twisted, torn between rage and humiliation. He shot me one last glare, filled with venom, before storming out. Eric scrambled after him, mumbling excuses, his bravado gone. The boardroom doors closed behind them, and for a moment, the silence was absolute. Then Pierce turned back to me. Ethan, he said, you've proven yourself today. Not just in your work, but in your patience and integrity. This company needs people like you. If you're willing, I'd like you to step into a senior role immediately. A rush of emotion surged through me, relief, vindication, triumph. I nodded, steady but resolute. I'm ready. That afternoon, I walked into Richard's old office. The same frosted glass walls, the same polished desk. But this time, it was mine. Eric was gone. Richard was gone. And I was no longer the man who had been discarded, humiliated, forgotten. I was the one who had risen. As I sat in that chair, I thought back to the night I had been fired. Richard had looked at me with that smug smile, telling me to leave quietly, to accept defeat. He thought he had buried me. But he forgot one thing. When you bury a seed, it doesn't disappear. It grows. It takes root. And one day, it breaks through the soil stronger than before. Justice doesn't always come fast. It doesn't always come loud. But when it does, it's unstoppable. Richard lost everything because he underestimated the quiet worker, the man who didn't brag, the one who just kept going. And I gained everything because I waited, I watched, and when the time was right, I rose.